Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are taking yet another look at the Asus ROG Strix RX 5700 XT OC graphics card, but this time we are finally going to get to the bottom of what's wrong with this thing. Short version though, Asus has really screwed up. But before we get to the screw up, some backstory. So, back in October 2019, I reviewed the Strix RX 5700 XT, and I came away from that review very disappointed with what the card had to offer. This was the most expensive 5700 XT on the market, so I was expecting good things, and with such a massive heatsink and what is really an overkill PCB, it was looking like this card would deliver, but it just didn't. The card was hot, loud, and yeah, just very unimpressive. As a result, I recommended no one buy it and instead seek alternative products such as the Sapphire Nitro Plus or Power Color Red Devil. I also concluded by suggesting that the issue was probably fixable via a VBIOS update, as it seemed like this Strix model was sucking down around 20% more power than the Red Devil and Nitro Plus that I spoke of, as well as a few other high-end 5700 XT cards. So yeah, a future VBIOS update might have corrected the issue. Shortly after the Strix review went live, an Asus representative contacted me and explained that there was indeed an issue with the BIOS, claiming the VRM was configured incorrectly and a fix would be available by week's end. They also asked if I would retest with an early beta BIOS, but I declined, informing them that I'd only retest once the BIOS was publicly available, so that way I'd be testing what you, the viewers, have access to. I thought that would probably make the most sense. But anyway, none of that really matters because what Asus were promising back in mid-October didn't arrive until months later, and once it finally did arrive, it didn't work on the latest Windows 10 build, and the instructions, well, they were pretty bloody useless. And I covered all this at the end of my recent Gigabyte Aorus 5700 XT review. Having informed Asus about the various issues with the fix, such as it being detected as a virus, they informed me that an updated fix for the fix would be available soon. In late 2019, we finally got the fix. Now we're obviously in early 2020, but we have the fix, and I've been able to update my retail card with the BIOS. I'm disappointed though to inform you that it did stuff all. The card still runs hot and loud, basically no change since the original review. Actually, that's not quite true. My card's quality has declined since the original review, and I'll get to that in a moment. So to recap, shortly after my review went up on October 12th, Asus claimed they knew what the issue was, promised me it was fixable, and we'd see a fix later that same week. Now, 3 months later, we finally have the alleged fix, and it didn't do anything. The good news is though, I now know what the problem is, and it's not the BIOS, it's actually much worse than that. It was discovered by a few 5700 XT Strix owners that this is actually a quality control issue. Despite using a very large, actually very high quality heatsink, Asus failed to attach it to the PCB correctly, supporting the massive 1,453 gram heatsink at just 6 small screws. And worse still, they don't apply enough pressure. In fact, the 2 screws over the VRM apply no pressure at all, and as a result, you can easily pull the heatsink away from the PCB. And gravity alone does a pretty good job of that. Then the 4 screws used to connect the heatsink to the GPU, they just don't apply enough pressure, but at least they are spring-loaded and apply some pressure. Some is better than none, obviously. So the solution there has just been to pad them out with some plastic washers, and that increases the tension quite a bit, the mounting pressure, and you get good contact with the GPU die. And then for the VRM portion, I've just used some M.2 screws I had. They're a bit shorter, they're the same thread, so they worked well, solved the problem there. And now the card, you can't squeeze it, it's nice and tight, and when you've got it horizontally mounted, it won't sag down, so that's good. So here's a look at the performance before the fix. After an hour-long F1 2019 loop, the card peaked at 86 degrees, which is actually worse, quite a bit worse, than the result we got in our original review with the original BIOS, which saw the card hit 77 degrees. The increase could be caused by the new BIOS, though I doubt that, as the power consumption and operating frequencies remain unchanged. More likely, the cause is gravity. Yep, pesky gravity. The Strix heatsink is just too heavy for the mounting hardware, and prolonged use has caused the heatsink to pull further away from the PCB, or at the very least, the mounting pressure has been reduced. I suppose they're one and the same. Whatever the case though, as it stands, the card is peaking at 86 degrees with a ridiculously high fan speed of 3000 RPM. And check this out, by just squeezing the heatsink with my hand while the card is in operation, the GPU temperature dropped from 86 degrees down to 76 degrees in a matter of seconds. And that's basically the same temperature we saw in the original review, so yeah, bloody gravity. Of course, the moment I release the manual hand pressure, the card shoots back up to 86 degrees or thereabouts. Okay, so after padding out the screws with some plastic washers, which increases the pressure, here's how the Strix performs. And please note, the heatsink wasn't removed from the card, the thermal paste wasn't touched, so the only thing changed here is the mounting pressure. The card is now peaking at just 64 degrees. That's a 13-degree drop from the original review and a 22-degree drop from what the card was doing after a few months of operation. The downside to this fix is that it's caused the GDDR6 memory temperature to increase by 10 degrees, and the reason for that being that the main heatsink is now effectively transferring heat away from the GPU, causing it to get hotter, and as a result, warmer air is now being pushed over the heat spreader beneath, cooling the GDDR6 memory. Although an 84-degree memory temp is one of the worst results we've seen from an AIB model, most of which peaked around 76 degrees, it's still a safe operating temperature for the memory. Probably not acceptable for an ultra-expensive 5700 XT, but it won't impact the card's operation or end user's experience. And just quickly, for those interested, I decided to crank the fan speed up to 3000 RPM, which is what the card was doing before the fix. And this time, with the washers in place, the GPU dropped to a peak of just 54 degrees. And now the memory was running a bit cooler at 72 degrees with a VRM temperature of just 53 degrees. So overall, a very cool air-cooled card here. So there you have it. The best designed, I'd say the best designed PCB with one of the best, if not the best quality heatsink is let down by a few screws. It's probably let down by only having a few screws, and then the few it does have just aren't suitable for mounting a heatsink of this size. How Asus managed this kind of a screw up, no pun intended, it's really beyond me. It's not sure what to say on that one. You'd think after completely cocking up their Vega 56 and 64 models by misaligning the VRM thermal pads, which cause those cards to throttle, they'd be a little more vigilant with their new 5700 XT model. This isn't a rare defect either. Countless 5700 XT Strix owners have contacted us either by leaving a comment or by email, informing us that they too have a hot and loud card. In fact, this is the second Strix 5700 XT that I've tested, and they've both had this issue. Asus actually included us in their first wave of samples, but our model ran very hot, and I noticed it had been tampered with, which was annoying, as that doesn't allow us to report on factory performance, as we did in our review. And that is, of course, the kind of performance you'll see out of the box. After raising this concern with Asus, they asked that we not review that sample, and instead they pulled a brand new model from local retail stock. Unfortunately, that model performed exactly the same, which was very confusing at the time, given how massive and impressively designed the heatsink appears to be. Of course, we now know what the issue is, and for those of you who have bought one of these affected Strix cards, it's extremely frustrating. It's also worth noting that there is some risk involved in fixing this card yourself, and probably, I suppose, a greater point is when you're spending this kind of money on a premium graphics card, there should be no fixing required. But anyway, the screws themselves are very thin. You obviously have to use very thin screws that the thread has to match up with what you're screwing it into. And because they are so thin, they do snap very easily when done up too tight. Normally the solution there would be not to do them up too tight. That's usually quite easy to avoid doing, but in this case you have to do them up as tight as they will possibly go, pretty much almost a breaking point for them to work. So that is a bit of a problem. And this, in my opinion, is a fundamental design flaw of the card. I mean, when strapping on what is essentially a 1.5 kilogram piece of metal to a PCB, I reckon it would make sense to upgrade the mounting hardware, and really that is what Asus should have done. I'm wondering if they've changed the screws early on in the production phase, as most reviewers who received samples saw peaks of around 66 degrees, which is very close to the temperature we reported after the fix. I'm also wondering if reviewers who tested the cards early on have gone back and checked if thermals are still where they should be, or if perhaps gravity has taken hold and now the card is running a bit hotter than what they reported in their review. So that would be interesting to know. But whatever the case, Asus has failed to identify this issue and correct it, because we're still receiving reports of high operating temperatures from those unfortunate enough to purchase the Strix model. That said, I have heard from Strix customers with working cards that peak around 66 to 68 degrees, so this does appear to be a quality control issue. And that being the case, I can't stress this enough, don't buy a Radeon 5700 series graphics card from Asus. Really doesn't matter which model, they're all flawed in one way or another. In my initial review, I concluded by saying, at the end of the day, the Strix is a very high quality 5700 XT, it's just tuned too aggressively and is heavily overpriced. I was wrong about the aggressively tuned part, or at least that wasn't the only problem, and I was really wrong about the quality. Yeah, it does have a really nice heatsink, but if Asus can't mount it to the card correctly, then it's really not a high quality product. Moving forward, I would like to see Asus address the design flaw as soon as possible and then commit to supporting any customers who are reporting high operating temperatures with a Strix 5700 XT. So either replace it with an updated fixed model or apply the fix for the customer, because right now, the current situation, it just isn't good enough. On that note, if you happen to have a defective Strix 5700 XT and Asus isn't taking appropriate action to fix it, then please let us know about that in the comment section below. Yeah, would like to hear about it. I'd also like to hear back from anyone else who has anything to add to this or any thoughts or whatever. Of course, we do always read your comments, so drop them below. And that's going to do it for this one. Hope you guys appreciated our follow-up on this. Again, not trying to take credit for discovering what was wrong with the card, because we didn't. It was basically other users, people who had bought this card and tried to work out why it wasn't performing as some of the reviews suggested it should. So good work on their behalf, and sorry it took us so long to follow up on it, but we've had a lot on our plate. But we finally got to it, so hopefully exposing this issue will help those out who are suffering from it. And if you do appreciate that we sort of try to keep the companies honest, then you can join us over on our Patreon page, support our work there, also become part of the Harbour Unboxed community. And I think that's about everything on this one. Yeah, bit of a disappointing product to this one. I had high hopes for the Strix model, but anyway, until they can get those quality control issues sorted out and assure us that they are fixed, I can't really recommend it. But anyway, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.